to attachment. That then leads to attachment to I and mine. So first there's the misconception, which consists of many misconceptions. That gives rise to the exaggerating attitude. And if I had drawn it in a better way, you would have this self-centered attitude there as well. I'll try to do this for next time. Does that make sense? Okay, first I need to get your bag. All right. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you feel that this is clear? How we get to this exaggeration? Now,
I'm
B may
sorry,
not.
I had to go to the bomb shelter. So your co-host.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Yeah, B, there you are. Is that a little clearer now? Like, do you get a better sense how from all these exaggerated wrong views, you then get to this exaggerated sense of I and mine being more important? B, is that clearer? So you have all these misconceptions. They're all exaggerations here, all exaggerations. Not only do I exist, but I exist inherently. Not only do I have a body and a conventional, no, it exists inherently. And therefore, I and my happiness are most important. That's just of all these exaggerated minds, adding them together, you have a sense I'm more important. My happiness is more important. Hope that makes it a little bit clearer. I'll send everything to everyone. I just didn't have the time. It was a little bit like last minute that I put this together. So this is the exaggerated. It's not the self-centeredness yet because attachment arises a moment later. Okay. And if you have further questions, you're welcome to send your questions to me. Then there are some questions here. Oh, I also prepared some new material, but again, I didn't have any time to send it off. So I'll do that within the next few days. I'll have a little bit of time to do that in Singapore. So within this week, you'll get the new material. Class, that's today. Yes, so today's class. There's Shmuel's question. Okay, I want to see Shmuel. Where are you? There you are. Just reduce this a little bit. Huh. Anyway, okay, I hope you can see the question. So, from the point of view of the lower tenet systems, well, anyway, yeah, so from the low, would you agree that I'm Israeli? So Shmuel Israeli. Yes, I agree he's Israeli. If you wouldn't, then he would argue that he's Israeli because he has Israeli citizenship. Yeah, well, according to common conventions, you're Israeli if you have Israeli citizenship. Okay. If I were to agree that he's Israeli, well, then consider one of my future rebirth in which I'm not born as Israeli. Is that future rebirth still me? This cannot be because I'm an Israeli and that future rebirth is not. Yeah, so if he's born, let's say, in the USA and he has American citizenship but not Israeli citizenship, he's not an Israeli. If that is not me, however, then why should I take care of what future rebirth experiences? How would you answer this as a defender in debate from the point of view of the lower tenet systems? Okay. Now, from the point of view of the lower tenet systems, they don't talk about uh, labeling, designation in the same way, of course, as the consequentialist school does, but they still posit the definition of a person. Now, person here is used in a wider sense than we use it ordinarily. So, for instance, a cow would consider to be a person, a living being. So, person is usually the translation for the Tibetan word kansa. And a kansa or a person or a living being is imputed by all schools as a being who is labeled on the basis of the four or five aggregates. So the four or five, the reason for saying four or five is that some beings don't have a body, for instance, in one of the levels of the formless realm. In the formless realm, beings don't have a body. So, but they're still labeled on the basis of the four aggregates, at least the mental aggregates. Okay, so the definition is still the same, although they would say that Shmuel exists inherently, but he's labeled. They don't see a contradiction in that. Only the consequentialist school would say that's a contradiction. Okay, so therefore, well, who's Shmuel? Who is, when I say you, Shmuel, like you, I'm thinking of you right now, having a certain mind, having a certain body. I'm labeling you on the basis of your 5 aggregates in general, which is why I would say you're Israeli. You're not an American. But then in the future, when we talk about the future, well, then I'm referring to you, just for a lack of a better word. I'm saying um, I'm talking about your mental continuum, and of course, whichever body you're going to have in the future, which I don't know, but still knowing that you'll eventually have a body, or taking the example of you being reborn as a human being and being an American, in that case, I label your future I, and that becomes a different I in that moment. But when I just say you in general, you're Israeli. When I talk about your future life, then you become this American. But these are different contexts. It's in relation to different situations that I use the word you. But as I said before, in general, you is you right now based on your present aggregates. Now, your question is more, well, if you're not your future rebirth, why do I bother about, karma, etc.? Well, you don't need to go as far as next rebirth. I mean, when we talk about you right now versus you next week, you next week don't exist yet. You next week doesn't exist yet. So your next week's Shmuel doesn't exist yet. When I say you, specifically talking to you right now, I'm talking to the present Shmuel who is online at this point, who is at this point on the 4th of November right here. So it always depends on the context, but right now I'm talking to you in your present. I'm addressing you right now. So you're not the person next week's, you're not, I don't know, 1st of January 2025 Shmuel. And 1st of January 2025 Shmuel is also not you. And still, you're careful about what you do right now. I mean, what you eat, for instance, to be sure that on New Year, on the 1st of January of 2025, you're not going to be sick. So, although you are not that person, you're not even the person tomorrow. Because if you were this person, you were Shmuel tomorrow, then you would be permanent. Because then you today and you tomorrow would be one. And if you today and you tomorrow are one, you don't change between today and tomorrow. And still, there's a continuum. There's going to be a mind tomorrow, Shmuel's mind tomorrow that experiences whatever are the consequences from today's Shmuel state of mind. So in that sense, there's this connection. And even though it's not you right now, it's the same continuum. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? This is a difficult one, of course, because who you are right now is not going to be who you. I mean, like I said, you don't need to talk about next life. You just can talk about next month's I or tomorrow's I. It's not the same. It's going to be a different I with a different mind, a different body. Your mind changes, your body changes. There's still the sense it's the same, but if enough time passes within this lifetime, for instance, your sense of Shmuel when you were a baby and your sense of Shmuel now is very different. You don't identify with that baby. In fact, you don't remember being Shmuel the baby. And Shmuel the baby had no idea what it felt like to be Shmuel the adult. And still, there is that connection. There's this sense of Shmuel. Well, I don't know how careful Shmuel the baby was about how to plan ahead for the future. I mean, probably not really, but your parents took care of that. And then slowly with your mind, I mean, the fact you went to school and at some point you were the one who wanted to go to school because you were concerned of your future, etc. So there was a sense of this continuation and therefore of planning ahead, right? Shmuel. Okay, where are you? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, oh, good. It's like, am I just talking to myself? All right. So, Shmuel, does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
So, technically speaking, would you say that this rebirth is still me or not? Yes or no? I'm not really clear about like this answer.
You mean like the future? Well, it depends on how I label you. You see, like I said in the very beginning, when I say you, when I talk to you right now, I'm thinking of the present, Shmuel. Not talking about yesterday's. I'm not talking about tomorrow's. Okay, when I talk to you at this point right now. But I can also talk about you in a different context, you in this lifetime, which is a Shmuel that spans, let's say you live up to the age of 90. Well, that spans this entire life of Shmuel the Israeli. Then I label you on the basis of this continuum. But I'm certainly not talking about future Shmuel. I'm talking about you having this continuum of a body, of the present body, and the continuum of the present mind that is connected to this present body from an infant to the old man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if I talk about your future life, I'm no longer talking about Shmuel the Israeli. I don't know what you're going to be. I take the example of an American. I talk about you having the body of an American. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends on how I use the word. Because you don't exist inherently, I can use, because there's no inherent you, I can use you on the basis of labeling you can be different. I can talk about you in a previous life when you were an Egyptian dancer, for instance, right? You, Shmuel, when you were this Egyptian dancer, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, the basis of labeling is again different. But I need to refer to it, but since I'm addressing you as like your previous incarnation, I use the word you. But I'm certainly not talking about you, the Israeli. So it just depends. Depends on the context. Depends on what we're talking about. But in general, when we say you, Shmuel, in my mind, what appears as Shmuel of this lifetime, the Israeli.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
But I'm flexible that way. I'm flexible that way. I can talk of the the Egyptian dancer, right?
So
I can
me
talk
and
about,
the
yeah, go ahead.
so me and the future American is the same continuum, but
Same
not
continuum,
this.
mental continuum, not physical continuum. Mental. Here I'm mainly focusing on your mental continuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, I think it does. Yes.
Think about it. Okay, great. Very good. And you'll be welcome. You're welcome to come back. Okay, last question for today. Jimmy's question is a technical question. I think when we say that I separate myself from everyone else, it's simply speaking true, but may not be technically 100% correct. Why? Because the statement seems to imply that there's some sort of I before the separation happens. The I, what does the separation? I would say that technically speaking, before the separation, there's no I, but only dependent arising. Okay. Well, first of all, there's of course an I, but there's a conventional I that is dependently arisen. Yes, absolutely. But here we're more talking about the mind projecting, like the mind perceiving a non-existent I. So not just saying in general there's no I, but perceiving a non-existent I and then separating ourselves from everyone else in the sense of perceiving ourselves to be inherently different from everyone else. Yeah, so yes, this is just a way of saying, I mean, it's just a way of talking. For instance, we talk about this person has a huge ego, for instance. Well, what do we actually mean with that? Like, do they have a strong self-centeredness? Or are we saying that they projected this huge inherent I, the sense of a very important I, and they hold on to it? Well, in the second case, it doesn't exist, the kind of projection of this hugely important I, but we still say they have a huge ego. So it's just a way of talking. So here we have to differentiate between yeah, is this just what the mind projects, or is this what is actually there? So I think if I use this expression, I separate myself from everything else, I was talking about it in the sense of the mind just projecting this distance, this separation, myself from everyone else, where it's really just a projection of an inherent I that seems to be inherently different from everyone else. So yeah, I agree with him that technically that it's not literally saying that there is such a self. So unfortunately, your question about the communication comes last. Well, we could do it next time. I hope that's okay. Yeah, I try to go in the order here, and I want to go a little bit through the text. I want to not just answer questions. So for the future, if there's a question you want to be answered first, then please mention it first. If it doesn't matter, then yeah, then it's fine. Great. I hope I've answered at least one question that everyone had. Question number 3. Yep. Okay. So yeah, Jimmy, I'll do it next time. And if there's a chance to do it from Singapore because of the time difference, no, it's actually overlap. It'll overlap. But I'll check. Okay. Now for today's class, for today's
Geshe-ma,
yes, please.
are yeah, you mentioned you're in Singapore. That's where my family lives. Are you going there just passing through? Or are you going to stay there for a while?
I'm going to teach there for about 10 days.
Oh, where? Oh,
at the Tibetan Buddhist, TBC. Tibetan Buddhist Center.
Oh, TBC, not ABC.
No,
not the
no,
Amitabha Buddhist
TBC.
Center.
No, the
I'll tell
Buddhist
them.
Center.
The Tibetan Buddhist Center. Okay, so I'll tell my
Tibetan Buddhist Center.
niece.
Okay. Are you from Singapore? Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah, that's where
okay.
I mean, I'm Indian, but my family lives in Singapore.
Yeah. I usually also stay with an Indian lady in Singapore.
Oh, what date will you be there, Geshe-ma? Do you know?
I'm leaving on Wednesday, that's the 6th, and I'm returning to India on the 18th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Okay, so let's go back to the text. Now, we've discussed last time the process by which the imprints of the mental afflictions give rise to the lack of omniscience. Okay, so I think we did this part. So the root ignorance leaves mental imprints every time it becomes active. Where did we get to last time? Does anyone remember the page number? Was it this page 39? Does anyone remember? Oh, I think we got up to here. Just saying that you can think of the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of the universal vehicle as well, from the point of view of the Sanskrit tradition. Whereas usually when we say Four Noble Truths, we talk about it from the point of view of the fundamental vehicle or the Pali tradition. So more specifically here, so the lack of omniscience. Well, anyway, we went through them. This footnote explains the Four Noble Truths from the perspective of the universal vehicle, and therefore now the process by which we, again, it's in the context of saying, well, to understand that enlightenment is possible, to understand that, or to realize enlightenment, we also need to understand emptiness. Why? Because there's certain things, certain processes in relation to the Four Noble Truths, and this time the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of the universal vehicle, they need to be understood, which is mainly what is the truth of suffering, the fact that we're not omniscient. That's our suffering. That's our limitation, basically. So it's not a suffering in the conventional sense, in the ordinary sense, but for a bodhisattva, for instance, who has already eliminated the obstructions to liberation. In other words, who has eliminated the mental afflictions together with their seed, for them, not being omniscient is a limitation, is a suffering. It's something that they want to get rid of by all means. And what is the cause of that? Well, it's the imprints. That's the truth of the origin. So the imprints that were left in the mind by ignorance. Therefore, it's important to first understand how we ended up with the imprints. to understand how the truth of the origin, in this case, from the perspective of the universal vehicle, how the truth of origin gave rise to the truth of suffering. Or in other words, how the ignorance, how the imprints give rise to the lack, or are responsible for the lack of omniscience. Okay. But then we also need to understand how these imprints can be removed. So the imprints, which in this case are the truth of the origin, they can be removed. And by removing them, we're removing the absence of omniscience. So we achieve omniscience. So this process of directly realizing emptiness gives rise to Buddhahood. Okay, so here this is the truth of the path that gives rise to the truth of cessation. So truth of cessation meaning here the cessation of the cognitive obscurations. All right, so the process by which the imprints of the mental afflictions give rise to the lack of omniscience. The first process involves a causal sequence whereby the root ignorance leaves mental imprints every time it becomes active. So every time it manifests in our mental continuum. Now think about this. Every time there is any type of mind, it leaves something behind, a residue, a karmic imprint, of course, as well. But here we talk about a different type of imprint, an imprint that performs the function of obstructing the mind. Here in particular, we talk about the root ignorance, of course. Not every mind leaves an obstructive imprint behind, but here in particular, it's the root ignorance every time it manifests, and it manifests a lot. We're just not aware of it. It leaves an imprint every time it becomes active, so it manifests in our continuum. And these imprints not only cause everything that appears to our mind to seem to exist inherently. So every time, because of these imprints, we perceive anything, it appears to exist inherently. That is why it's so difficult to understand emptiness, because there's no mind. If I were to talk about emptiness, or any teacher talks about emptiness, it's not like, well, think of this mind, the way it perceives things. This is a mind that perceives, or the way in which phenomena appear to it as not inherently existent. There's no example, because everything appears to exist inherently. So that is caused by the imprints. But not only that, not only does everything appear to exist inherently, but the imprints also obstruct the attainment of Buddhahood. They also prevent our mind from simultaneously and directly knowing all things, right? So they obstruct the attainment of Buddhahood, which is really saying they prevent our mind from simultaneously and directly knowing all phenomena. And that is the main problem, because for a bodhisattva, that's the main issue. They can't be most effective when it comes to benefiting sentient beings, because their mind is not yet omniscient. They can't show sentient beings the path in the most effective way for them, well, being most beneficial for them. The root ignorance similarly gives rise to other mental afflictions. This also needs to be understood, of course, because if you want to understand how we are and how come we're not enlightened, well, that also includes how come we're not liberated. Because in order to become enlightened, we also need to become liberated first. So the root ignorance similarly gives rise to other mental afflictions, such as attachment, aversion, etc. And they also leave imprints in our mental continuum whenever they're active. And like the imprints left by the root ignorance, these imprints, these mental propensities, are responsible for our lack of omniscience. So every imprint left by a mental affliction is responsible for our mind being obscured from our mind, although it has the nature of knowing things, and it can know quite a few things. But this nature of knowing anything, it actually has the ability to know everything in terms of its potential, its fundamental potential. It could know everything, but that's not possible because of these imprints left on our mind, because they prevent our mind from realizing everything that exists, which is its basic nature, as I just said. Therefore, to comprehend Buddhahood, we must first understand the process by which the root ignorance creates the other mental afflictions, contaminated karma, and the different types of suffering. We need to also understand that. If you've already understood it in the context of liberation, fine. But this understanding needs to be there. And then this understanding is then followed by recognizing how the root misconception and the other mental afflictions, every time they arise, leave mental imprints that prevent our mind from knowing everything at the same time. All right, so this process needs to be understood in order to understand enlightenment. But then, of course, how can we get rid of this? Get rid of the mental afflictions and, most importantly, the imprints. Now, the process of directly realizing emptiness gives rise to Buddhahood. That needs to be understood. So how the truth of the path gives rise to the cessation of cognitive obstructions, cognitive obscurations, in order to reach Buddhahood. Our comprehension of the first process, so how the truth of origin gives rise to the truth of suffering, in particular from the perspective of the universal vehicle. We need to understand both, of course, from the point of view of the fundamental vehicle, but here in particular from the point of view of the universal vehicle. So truth of origin, as I said earlier, refers to the imprints, truth of suffering, the absence of omniscience. That understanding must be followed by an understanding of the second process, in which the truth of the path gives rise to the truth of cessation. So what does this mean? What does it entail? It entails recognizing that the meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness, gradually eliminates the root ignorance and consequently all other mental afflictions. And once the afflictions are eradicated, this meditative equipoise, which is here the truth of the path in this context, once the afflictions are gone, which is strengthened by bodhicitta, as I said last time, it gets stronger again, and as you continue, it becomes stronger and stronger. It's able to eliminate subtler levels of obstructions that previously it couldn't eliminate. But it's through the force of, well, love, compassion, of course, but mainly bodhicitta, that this meditative equipoise will gradually also remove the imprints of the afflictions. I hope this is clear how although bodhicitta and the meditative equipoise realizing emptiness directly in the continuum of a bodhisattva cannot become active at the same time. When one is active, the other one lies dormant. However, despite one of them lying dormant while the other is active, they still can strengthen each other. This is just the nature of the mind, how we can have states of mind that are not active that still influence our other consciousnesses. Okay, and there are plenty of examples, like everyday kind of examples. If it's not yet clear, please let me know and I'll give you an example. As before, this realization must be preceded by the recognition that the root misconception is a wrong consciousness, which requires the prior realization of emptiness. All right, so as before, we need to understand that the main problem, of course, is the root ignorance, that it's not rooted in reality, it's not grounded in reality, it's a wrong consciousness, its object doesn't exist, which is just the same as saying nothing exists inherently. So we understand the lack of inherent existence. And so to summarize, we must understand, oh my God, this is still really early. Oops, my sense of time is totally upside down. Sometimes I feel like I talk for 5 minutes, and we're supposed to, well, I mean, most of the times, I mean, we're already at, what is it, 9:45, Indian time. Okay, anyway, never mind. So in essence, what do we have to realize? Emptiness, or the lack of inherent existence, which allows us to understand. So first of all, emptiness needs to be understood. Once we understand that, we are able to understand the root misconception is a wrong consciousness. So we know, okay, since there's no inherent existence, the mind that perceives inherent existence is just a wrong mind. As it is mistaken, I should say wrong, or mistaken with regard to its main object, mistaken with regard to its main object, inherent existence. No, I should say wrong. Liora pointed it out and I forgot to change it. So wrong with regard to its main object, inherent existence, Once we realize this, we come to comprehend that the meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness is the direct antidote to the root misconception, because it eliminates the root ignorance and thus all other afflictions. This is because it is the exact opposite of the root ignorance in terms of what it perceives, while it is accompanied by a deep degree of concentration and directly realizes its object. That's the same as before. So this meditative equipoise, a very focused mind, it directly experiences its object, and it's directly opposed to, in terms of what it perceives, to the root ignorance. Root ignorance perceives inherent existence, it perceives the absence of inherent existence. So with this mind, once we understand that it can eliminate the root ignorance, with this recognition, we come to understand that once the afflictions are eliminated, so we eliminate the misconception, we eliminate the other afflictions gradually. So once we understand this is possible, we also understand that the meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness can remove the imprints or cognitive obstructions, because they were left there by the root ignorance in the first place. So that which is the opposite of the root ignorance in terms of what it perceives can eliminate any residue left by the root ignorance. So this comprehension leads to the cognition of enlightenment. So based on that, I can eliminate anything from my mind that's not actually in the nature of the mind and that limits my mind. All right. So in short, recognition of the highest good, both liberation and Buddhahood, requires the realization of emptiness, Sunil, just a sec, as it involves recognizing that the root ignorance, which is the primary cause of both afflictive and cognitive obstructions, is a wrong consciousness and it can thus be eliminated. Okay, I hope this is clear. Sunil, please go ahead.
Geshe, on this point of cognitive, the imprints, are these imprints only of the appearance of inherent existence, or are there also imprints of the afflictions? Because I'm trying to understand why this is called cognitive obscurations.
Why are the imprints called cognitive obscurations? Well, they're also sometimes described as obscurations to enlightenment. That's another term that is used, but that's usually more the definition of cognitive obscuration. So the word cognitive means obscurations to knowing. They're obscurations to knowing. So knowing what? Everything. Knowing the true truth, for instance, simultaneously, which we cannot do with one mind. In particular, with a direct perceiver, we cannot know conventional and ultimate truth at the same time. And of course, we cannot be of greatest benefit to others because we don't know what they're thinking, what they need, what their karma is, and so forth. Yeah, so cognitive in that the mind, we need to understand that the mind's basic function is to know. That's what it does best, but it's obscured by these imprints. All right. Are there any further questions on what I just said? On what we've just gone through? Because if there aren't any more questions, I'll continue. Oh yes, Shmuel. Shmuel, go ahead.
Yes, Venerable. So I wanted to ask, since we have an infinite amount of imprints from beginningless time, and we have to remove them all, doesn't it follow that it would take infinite time to remove them all?
All right, okay. Yeah, that one with the infinite. We're not very good with infinite, by the way. We like a beginning and an end, right? So infinite, infinite sentient beings, infinite. Well, anyway, okay. So even though there are infinite ones, it doesn't matter how many they are. Let's say, let me give you an example, a good example. If you have a space, a space that is so large and it's dark, right? And when you switch on a light, If you switch on a powerful light, then it doesn't matter how large this black space is, simultaneously every black or dark aspect of this space will be lit up. It doesn't matter whether it's just a small space or a large space. With this huge light, everything is lit up. One example. Other examples where, it doesn't matter if it's just, what is another example? Whether it's just one or it's many. Like if you have a vacuum cleaner and there's just one grain of dust on the, or one speck of dust on the floor. Well, the vacuum cleaner is so powerful. If it's just one speck, it can take up. If it's thousands of specks of dust, it can suck them in. It doesn't matter. Even if it's infinite, if it's and the vacuum cleaner example is probably not that good because it takes a time to kind of suck it up. Here it's just a matter of when you directly realize emptiness and the mind is not powerful enough, no matter what imprint they are, they're automatically gone, even if they're infinitely many. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in the end, yeah, I can't give you any more satisfactory answer. It seems like if it's infinite, it takes infinite time, but that's just not the case. It's like because they have a certain strength, these imprints, they're coarser ones, they're subtler ones, some are easier to be removed, some are. And this is true even for the coarsest levels. We start on the path of seeing. When you realize emptiness for the first time directly, you already eliminate some of the coarsest. They're described as intellectually acquired obscurations. So in this case here, afflictive obscurations. So the seed, again, you could say there are endless seeds, okay? And then later on the 8th ground, when you start to eliminate the coarsest cognitive obscurations, you're not able yet to eliminate the subtler types, but the coarser types. But still, of the coarser types, they're infinite ones. And still, if you can eliminate one, you can eliminate all. That's just the power of the mind, and it doesn't matter how many there are. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Sorry, there's nothing more I can say. All right. Okay, so then, okay, Shmuel, can you remove your hand? All right. And if there's another, oh, Varda, she also raised her virtual hand. Please go ahead, Varda. Unmute yourself.
I wondered, is the word or the meditative equipoise, is it the last meditation, or is it the meditation that you afterwards go out of the cave and then some of the things you realized and some of the things you don't?
Can you be more specific? What do you mean by the last?
There is this meditation that when you get, I think it's the meditative equipoise, that when you get out of the cave, sort of
Get out of the what?
Cave.
Cave. Which cave?
Sort of. Never mind the cave, but you get out of the meditation.
Okay, let me explain what I mean with meditative equipoise before I get confused about caves and stuff. So, okay, first of all, when you first realize emptiness, it's conceptual. It's a conceptual mind. It's inferential understanding, right? So that's how we start off. And then the next step is the fact that, well, to recognize that our mind, although it conceptually understands emptiness by way of a general image of what emptiness means, right? A conceptual mental consciousness. So understanding, first of all, that our mind is not focused enough. That although we can sit down to, again, you sit down, let's just be practical. Like if Varda, you've realized emptiness, well, you still get up and do other things. You have to cook, you have to go shopping. So it's unlikely that through all this time, you're always thinking of emptiness. You may for a few moments, but you can't hold this mind. And even when you sit down to meditate, maybe for 10 minutes, and then something else comes up. You think about other things. So you need now calm abiding. Very important. That's the next step. So you develop calm abiding until you're able to focus on emptiness. While subtly analyzing it, you're able to focus on it for at least 4 hours. So you have now a conceptual mind that is described as a union of calm abiding. You have the aspect of concentration, while at the same time being able to very subtly analyze emptiness. So it's a union of calm abiding and special insight. But the problem with this mind is that it's not a direct experience. So this is like, to give you an example, thinking of your breakfast versus seeing your breakfast directly, right? You close your eyes, your breakfast is in front of you. Your breakfast, you can still perceive, you can know your breakfast, but it doesn't appear as clearly because your eyes are closed. And it's just a representation of what your breakfast means to you that appears to your mind. So you closed your eyes, right? It's a clear, pretty clear appearance, but it's not the real deal versus looking at it directly. So when you compare the quality of these two, it becomes obvious that directly perceiving your breakfast and perceiving it while closing your eyes and just remembering what it looked like are very different minds. So this is the comparison we can draw here between conceptually knowing emptiness, although there's calm abiding, you can do it for 3-4 hours without any disruption, etc. But it's still not a direct experience. It's a conceptual mind. So now you need to familiarize more with this realization until you directly experience it with a mental consciousness. You experience emptiness in such a way that it's a non-dual mind. Nothing appears to your mind other than emptiness. With a conceptual mind, even inherent existence, your emptiness, the emptiness that appears to your conceptual mind still appears to exist inherently. The emptiness appears to exist inherently, right? Emptiness itself. And you can only perceive the emptiness of one particular phenomenon. So your mind is very restricted in terms of what I just said. Only the emptiness of one object, only the emptiness of that particular object appears to exist inherently. The generic image appears. So it's a dual mind. And there's also a sense for that mind itself that's its object, emptiness, and the mind are separate. So that conceptual mind needs to now give way to a direct experience of emptiness where none of what I said earlier is still there. I mean, you don't just realize the emptiness of one object, but the emptiness of all objects, of all phenomena. Secondly, there's no appearance of inherent existence of emptiness. No, emptiness doesn't appear as existing inherently. In fact, it appears as not existing inherently. There's no appearance of a generic image, of a representation of what emptiness means to your mind. None of that appears. There's no distance between the mind and its object. They become like water being poured into water. The mind is so absorbed in its object, there's no sense this is the mind and this is the object. None of that. And that meditative absorption, which is described as meditative equipoise, that is the mind we need to develop. That direct experience, totally focused, that is able to eliminate the obstructions. And that mind you only reach on the path of seeing. Does that make sense?
I thought it was the name for the previous meditation, not the last meditation. But
what do you mean with previous and last? I don't know what you mean with previous and last.
The conceptual and the non-conceptual. I thought that, okay, now I'll remember.
Okay, so the conceptual mind cannot eliminate anything.
Okay.
Only this direct experience as I described it, only that can. So meditative equipoise is just that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's important to remember. Yeah, sure, you're welcome. All right, any more questions on what we just discussed?
I've always wondered about the non-dual mind, but this might be a longer conversation. Do we want to do it here?
Just let me hear the question and then I'll decide.
Okay. Water pour into water. That's the analogy that you were using, where the mind is almost like the object. And that's what is oftentimes said. And it is called a non-dual mind, but yet what appears is just emptiness. And And in any case, in the conceptual mind realizing emptiness, also only emptiness appear. The mind itself doesn't appear, except in this case, the emptiness is in the form of a meaning generality. So somehow I can't get it through my thick skull, this non-dual part. Because when it comes down to it, the mind and emptiness, they are two different
objects. Yes. Yeah, they are. Okay, when I say the mind is non-dual, I'm saying it seems as if mind and object were like water being poured into water. I'm not saying they are. The mind is still a mind, the object is still an object. But if you think of usually when we perceive an object, isn't there a sense that my mind is over here and the object is over there? There always seems to be like a distance, which there is. There is. I mean, there is this separation.
Okay.
But here,
that was good. But in that direct realization of emptiness, it is said that only emptiness appear. The mind itself doesn't appear. So how do I then get a sense that the mind and the emptiness have no distance if the mind itself doesn't appear?
Oh, just because there's this absence of a distance, it doesn't mean that the mind has to appear. I mean, it's not like the words appear. If I think of the words, oh, my mind and the object appear as if there was no difference between them, then of course, but I'm not talking about the words appearing. Like, let me give you another example. Oftentimes we find analogies in everyday life that help to illustrate this, although they're not all the way, that they don't illustrate it in all its aspects, but they help us to understand it better. Like sometimes, most of the time, there's a sense I'm here and there's my object, but sometimes we're so absorbed into something we forget about ourselves. We forget about ourselves, of awareness. We're no longer aware that we're aware, in other words. You're just totally focused on just this object. Have you had these moments when there's no longer everything else disappears around you? Have you had these moments? Like
Yes.
total absorption. So think of it this way. There's no longer like any kind of self-awareness or a sense of I'm aware or my mind is aware. You're just totally absorbed. That's what they mean. So it's very hard to put it into words, and these words are still very limited. But yeah, if you think of like being so absorbed that all that appears to you is only the object, that's what's meant. So all that appears to that mind is just emptiness. Everything else, yeah.
So does emptiness appear, and there isn't a sense of awareness of the emptiness?
Yeah, there's no sense of that. There's no sense whatsoever. Whereas right now, I perceive my laptop and there's a sense of aware. I mean, it's like my laptop is over there. I'm aware. It's like this thought creeps in there every now and then, or later on when I remember it, yeah, there's a sense of the observer and the observed, the apprehender and the apprehended. But with emptiness, it's like that all that is gone. It's just the mind is, yeah.
Basically, the mind drop off.
The mind drops off. The mind, it's just so absorbed. It's just so absorbed.
Yeah. The mind
just doesn't do any, yeah.
It is
doesn't do anything
that
this. Go ahead. Sorry.
So it's kind of like the mind drops off, but obviously the mind cannot drop off because it is cognizing emptiness.
Yeah, exactly.
There's the appearance of emptiness right there.
Yeah, exactly.
There cannot be an appearance of emptiness.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. That's something for me to think about. Thank you.
Okay. Good. All right. Is there anything else on this, on what we've just discussed? No? All right, great. So let's continue. So now what about the cognition of higher rebirth? They must be preceded by the realization of the law of karma and its effect. So this is what we've been trying to get at. So Gyaltsabje, for instance, he says in his commentary on Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, which is called Elucidation of the Path to Liberation, when commenting on the second chapter of Dharmakirti's text. So the Pramanavartika, many of you are aware of this text by Dharmakirti, of course. So the second chapter in particular is very important. And there's a commentary, a very important commentary by Gyaltsabje on the Pramanavartika, on Dharmakirti's text on logic. And so in the second chapter of this text, or the second chapter, or the commentary on especially the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti says that higher rebirth are very obscure phenomena. So he's very clear on that, because understanding them requires reliance on authoritative scriptural passages from the Buddha or other reliable masters. So we need to rely on scripture, although it's really hard to understand how you can, I mean, you can't have a full understanding of it, but some, I guess you could say, rougher kind of understanding is possible when it comes to a very obscure phenomenon. This is not true for manifest phenomena or for slightly obscure phenomena. You can totally understand something that is slightly obscure, but very obscure, I think there's only a very superficial kind of cognition. So this may seem a little weird. How can you cognize something but not fully cognize it? But there's so many examples. I mean, you can cognize a tree by just looking at it and know there's a tree, but you can know so much more about this tree, what it's made of and what its chemical, I don't know, substances, blah blah, all that. You can know there's so many levels of knowing, but you could just know tree by looking at it, knowing its shape and color. So there are many degrees of it, many different degrees of knowing something. So here I think you can know a very obscure phenomena, but in a coarser kind of way, which is sufficient in this case, definitely. Anyway, thus simply knowing a person. So yeah, so it's a very obscure phenomenon. Not just knowing a human being, so saying here, thus simply knowing a person who has attained a higher rebirth as a human, for example, that is not the same as understanding the concept of higher rebirth itself. So just knowing there's, a human being, we don't automatically know that this is a higher rebirth, because you need to know more than that. This is like recognizing an impermanent phenomenon, an impermanent object such as a table, without recognizing its impermanence, right? So this is a characteristic of human birth, that it's a higher rebirth, but we can know a human birth without knowing it is a higher rebirth. It's a characteristic of a table to be impermanent. In the same way, we can know that it's a table, but we don't necessarily know it's impermanent, although it is actually impermanent. So here, I hope the example makes sense. If not, please raise your hand. Okay. Moreover, so not only is it sufficient to know just a human being, or if you can perceive celestial beings, still that doesn't mean you know that they're higher rebirth. Moreover, understanding higher rebirth is not limited to recognizing the favorable qualities of that state. So, for instance, that beings in the human realm experience less suffering than those in the hell, the preta or animal realms. And to truly understand higher rebirth, it is so to truly understand, so just the amount of suffering or absence of suffering, again, that is not enough to understand that a particular state, so the human or any of the celestial states, that they are higher rebirth. So therefore, what do I need to understand? To truly understand higher rebirth, it is necessary to comprehend the karmic causes accumulated in previous lives that led to these existences. Not in great detail, not every detail, but to a certain degree. What is that degree? It's hard to say. So every action, whether mental, verbal, or physical, leaves a karmic imprint, of course, or potential on the mind stream, shaping future experiences in rebirth. To fully grasp the concept of higher rebirth, we must understand the specific karmic actions accumulated in the past that gave rise to them. So specific, again, it's really hard to say this much you need to know and this much. I mean, how much do you need to know a tree, that a tree is a tree? For some people it's more, for some people it's less. Very difficult to exactly determine. Yeah, it's familiarity with these aspects, but just to say it in general, I hope this is a little clearer then. So to have a sense of the karma that is necessary. Okay, Jimmy, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wondering about this specific karmic action. Since everything is dependently arising, how can you specify anything? Because everything depends on other causes and other causes, other causes. So there's no first cause.
Yeah, but I mean, you can know that a seed is necessary for a sprout, although the seed is dependent on other causes and on other causes and other causes, right? I mean, can you know if you plant, for instance, an apple tree in your garden and you enjoy the apples after a few years, you can know that this apple tree has arisen from this apple seed that you planted, even though this apple seed was dependent. So I'm not saying that you need to know all causes, but the specific karmic causes, in this case, it's the apple seed, like the ones that were responsible for this particular rebirth. The main, the you could say the primary karmic actions, if you like. Maybe I should add that the primary. I don't know. It doesn't really specify that, but yeah, this is what's so hard. I mean, what do you need to know? Like I said early on, what do I need to see to be able to see Jimmy, for instance, to recognize Jimmy? For some people, a finger is enough, right? If you're familiar with your finger, seeing your finger, you recognize, oh, there's Jimmy. For another person, you need to see the entire body. For someone else, you need to see the entire face or whatever. So it just depends. It's really hard to specify, but there's certain karmic actions. So I guess in general, what are the unique karmic actions that you need to accumulate to be born a human and not a celestial being, or to be born a celestial being and not a human? These you need to know. Does that make sense? So certain specific characteristics that you have versus, for instance, Dalit has. Right? So to be able to differentiate between the two. So recognizing Jimmy also requires my mind to kind of eliminate everyone else who's not Jimmy.
So it all goes back to conventions after all.
Yeah, in the end,
it's all just conventions.
Yeah, conventions as well. In the case of Jimmy, yeah, but conventions, yes, of course, it's all dependent on that. But there's certain unique characteristics that you have and no one else has. Right? So based on that,
conventional.
Yeah, but whether conventional or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, everything exists conventionally, so it's all based on that. But that's not what it comes down to. I mean, here in particular, it depends on characteristics that you need to you and not that others don't have. Yeah, on the conventional level. But again, that's not relevant in this context here. I mean, to understand what does it mean to realize something. Does that make sense? I mean, everything exists conventionally, but on that basis, I'm now saying, what does it mean to recognize something? What does it mean to recognize Jimmy? What does it mean to recognize a tree? How much do I have to understand? Well, it just depends on the person, how familiar they are with trees, how familiar they are with you. So how much do you need to understand a higher rebirth? It's really hard to determine, but I guess the kind of main karmic actions that are responsible for this rebirth versus another. Okay. This is hard because it is extremely subtle, so it's difficult to talk about. I hope, Jimmy, this was a little clearer. Was it a little clearer?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very good. Awesome.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, great. So therefore, to cognize or understand higher rebirth, we must delve into the intricate workings of karma and its effects, a very obscure phenomenon more difficult to realize than slightly obscure phenomena such as emptiness. All right, so this is how we got there. Like, what is the order? What is the sequence? And since it was mentioned in particular by Kenso Jampa, who composed this commentary, and I thought, well, this is the only commentary you have readily available to read in English, just to explain what Geshe-la or what Kenso talked about, Kenso-la. In short, the sequence in which high rebirth and the highest good are presented, and this is just the summary, are presented in the third verse of the Precious Garland, starting with higher rebirth, is determined by their order of arising, of course. It starts off mentioning higher rebirth, and that's because of their order of arising. This is because higher rebirth not only provide a conducive existential foundation for attaining liberation or enlightenment, but the practices of their causes, namely virtuous actions, also establishes a conducive mental foundation for the practice of the causes leading to liberation and enlightenment. So these are the two reasons that I gave in here. I think they were also mentioned by Gyaltsabje, definitely by Khenso Jampa Tekcho. So anyway, those have been explained. So please note that while the third verse only refers explicitly to the existential aspect, so being a foundation, being an important foundation, so rebirth in the lower realms is necessary in order to be liberated and enlightened, both the existential and mental foundations contribute to the order of higher rebirth and the highest good emphasized in the text. So there's no fault in adding that explanation that virtuous actions need to precede our practice of emptiness, compassion, and so forth as causes to liberation and enlightenment. So the causes of the higher rebirth, the practice of the causes of the higher rebirth need to precede the practice of the causes of liberation and enlightenment, in other words. Anyway, so to summarize the third verse, Nāgārjuna says, and the Precious Garland, oh, this should be in italics, Precious Garland, the causal and resultant dharmas of higher rebirth. So causal here means the causes that give rise to higher rebirth, and resultant is the higher rebirth themselves. So the causal and resultant dharmas of higher rebirth, referring to the causes, here it is, of higher rebirth and the resultant rebirth themselves, are set forth first, while the presentation of the causal and resultant dharmas of the highest good, referring to the causes of the highest good and the resultant highest good itself, comes later. This is because only after attaining higher rebirth can we gradually proceed towards attaining the highest good. All right. Okay, so that completes verse number 3. Now, it was really complicated, and yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I could keep it short, just give this explanation and be done with it, but it contains so much information that we usually study in the context of, for instance, we're here in particular in the context of Parchin, Four Noble Truth. They're very much emphasized. Now, I didn't go into many of the details we usually study. There's definitely later on the time when we can do that, but introduce, for instance, the idea, I thought that was really important. Understanding, realizing liberation, realizing enlightenment means, if you really understand it, and you don't need to understand it to attain it, especially initially you don't need to, but it helps to understand it, but it requires the understanding of emptiness first, for the reasons I've given earlier on. So if you want to understand liberation, Four Noble Truth. You want to understand enlightenment, Four Noble Truth. But this time, the Four Noble Truth, of course, from the perspective of not only the universal, the fundamental vehicle, but also from the point of view of the universal vehicle. So very important. And everything else, I think, I hope is clear. Of course, the order of the arising of higher rebirth, how one precedes the other, I think that's pretty clear in terms of the practice of virtuous actions, of course, having to precede the understanding of emptiness, of compassion, of love, and so forth, especially emptiness. Without practice in virtue, we won't be able to understand emptiness. Because if we have very strong afflictions, which are usually the causes, or actually always the causes for non-virtuous actions, the opposite of virtuous actions. So when we have these strong afflictions, then they're a huge obstacle to an understanding of emptiness, to wisdom, and they may cause our ignorance or our sense of I mean, we don't understand emptiness, in other words. It becomes so much harder. The more anger we have, the more self-centeredness we have, the harder it becomes to realize emptiness. So the more non-virtuous actions we accumulate, the harder it becomes to understand emptiness. So first we need to have the foundation of virtuous types of mind, compassion, and so forth, in order then to be able to practice. Oh my God. It was 12 minutes after 9 and now it's 47. Okay, sorry. I should stop talking here. Anyway, so hopefully it's clear enough why higher rebirth in terms of the arising comes first and then the highest good, but in terms of the cognition, the order is reversed. That completes all this explanation. Okay, so next time, what we'll do next time, we'll continue with verse number, oh, I forgot the number. No, verse number 4, I believe. Yeah, it's the fourth verse, which you no longer see. Yeah, I'll continue with that next time. Great. So let's do a meditation. Today in particular, on the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of the universal vehicle. But before we start with the analysis, let's do some breathing meditation. Now, since we started this session with the motivation to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, let's remember that mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, the main focus of which is enlightenment. So what does Buddhahood or enlightenment actually mean? Well, to understand that, you first need to reflect on what is it that obstructs us from Buddhahood, from having the omniscient, cognizing mind of a Buddha. That is mainly the imprints that are left on our mental continuum every time an affliction arises. Be it the root ignorance, attachment, aversion, and so forth. So from the perspective of the universal vehicle, our truth of suffering. Is our absence of omniscience, our lack of simultaneously knowing all phenomena. Which is the basic nature of our mind. Or a bodhisattva. It is a truth of suffering, since it prevents them from effectively benefiting sentient beings. It has been caused by the truth of origin, which are the imprints left on the mental continuum by the affliction. Having understood that, now we need to recognize that they can be removed from our mind. Since they were left by mental afflictions that are not in accordance with reality. They were left by extreme minds, such as the root ignorance, whose main object doesn't exist. As well as by other afflictions that not only were caused by the root ignorance, but that are also wrong consciousnesses. Exaggerating the negative aspect of its object in the case of anger, or the positive aspects of its object in the case of attachment. So since none of these minds are grounded in reality, we can remove them and their imprints by a mind that is grounded in reality. Which is a meditative equipoise, directly experiencing emptiness. So understanding that the root misconception is a wrong mind. Since inherent existence is impossible. We can then understand that the mind that realizes emptiness, that in terms of what it perceives is a direct contradiction or direct opposition to our root misconception. And due to its intense concentration and its direct experience, is able to not only remove all afflictive emotions together with their seeds, but once they've been removed, also eliminate the imprints left by the different afflictions on our mental continuum. So in that way, all the obscurations are gone. Afflictive and cognitive. Which means there's nothing left on our mind that prevents it from knowing all phenomena simultaneously. Or that prevents it from experiencing limitless love and compassion for all sentient beings. Motivating us to use our omniscience to show sentient beings how to become liberated and enlightened. So now to conclude this analytical meditation, whatever insight, whatever conclusion you've come to, in particular with regard to the possibility of your own enlightenment. Apply a stabilizing meditation for a few moments to deepen your insight. And then let's dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated. Most importantly, of course, towards our own enlightenment. So may we be able to actually do what we've just focused on. So may we be able to remove all the obscurations from our mind for the benefit of each and every sentient being. And at the same time, may all the positive potential we've accumulated cause our great lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all other great masters, to have a long and healthy life so they can continue to guide us and inspire us. And lastly, may whatever positive potential we've accumulated right away help the people around us, affect them positively, our family, our neighbors, our communities, and the entire country. And may in particular change people's attitudes in such a way that the war ends now and that everyone's suffering on both sides will find more peace and more happiness. And of course, that all those who are captured will be released right away. So with all this in mind, let's recite the dedication prayers. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings, without exception, into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chinrezik, Denzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right, thank you. And I'll let you know about having classes next Monday. If I do find the time,
This is
I'll
6
let
hours
Dalit know.
between Singapore and Israel. So I don't know if you can do it, because if it's 5 o'clock Israel time, so it's midnight at Singapore, something like that.
Oh, all right. I don't know the exact timing when I have class. I need to figure it out. I'll see
Okay,
whether it's
we will
possible.
speak each other and we
Yeah,
will
we'll
figure
talk
it.
about it. But
Yeah.
if there's no class next Monday, then we'll have class Tuesday the week after. So just one day later.
Okay.
And I'll send you all the material. I'm still working on it, but I'm pretty confident I'll find time when I'm in Singapore to complete the new material and send it to you like this week. All right. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a
Thank
great
you,
week.
Geshe-ma. Thank you.
And see you
Geshe-ma.
soon. Okay.
Have a great trip to
Bye.
Singapore.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, it will be
Bye.
easy.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.